The Gears of Emily Bronte. Wuthering Heights, my God. Upon completion of Emily Bronte's 1847 book, curious of its long-time reception, I stayed after class for some extra reading. There was no end to it, you can imagine. I raked in a fair bit of it. Beyond a handful of exemplary fragments, however, the general consensus left me cold. Somehow the fleet had taken a wrong turn at Liverpool. Stay off the saturated pier, I thought. But no, I wanted to contemplate this delicacy. And with that, let us begin. Outside a certain ongoing level of near mystical adoration, as I see it, interpretations of the work have generally splintered into three camps: scholarly inquisitors, cosmic space merchants, and pop culture enthusiasts. Of course, the latter has won the day. Hence, within this sofa-ensconced, often candy-coated atmosphere, most insight has been funneled into a near singular theme, that of wicked love. Wuthering Heights, then, stands firm as a kind of weird, Gothic romance. Ergo, after nearly 2 centuries of page flipping, a literary achievement has practically morphed into a dime store drama. Find it on the bookshelf next to Frank and Shirley Go Riding into the Sunset. I exaggerate, but not much. Without doubt, a ghastly type union does snake through the narrative, but its meaning is surreptitiously abstract. We assume, take liberties, it's tricky. Hence, the window is open and malleable, which at least in part may explain why this unsettling tale has achieved iconic notoriety. Edward Monk's painting The Scream, for instance, may be similarly categorized. Had this mysterious Heathcliff-Cathy relationship been blatantly defined, the book's impact, I figure, would have been highly diminished. Sophisticated art must recognize such things. Nay, by pulling on the reins, Bronte plays with our minds. She lands a cracking psychological bitch slap. With similar shrewdness, various characters crowd the plot with petty to awful behavior, but something far more specific is reaching for our throats. Deal with it. The book is an intimate portrait of a psychopath. One despotic lunatic destroys everything. Miss Bronte drags us through the mire of a diabolical mind. She wallows in it, fusses, nitpicks, classic movie wackos, as in Cape Fear or Fatal Attraction, would be mere amateurs by comparison. How could a soulless void, then, be capable of love? Heathcliff, our villain, our padded room candidate, is the focal point. He is the story. Everything that motivates his actions and subsequent reactions satisfies a diabolical lust for power and control. To maintain this agenda, he will stop at nothing. Why, though, would young Bronte, practically a girl, decide to paint such an intricate portrait of madness? Look to her fetid surroundings. I believe her intent was to fashion a grim allegory of humanity, heavily influenced by the burgeoning industrial world. What's more, by focusing on a specific brute, she is saying, there is no doubt about it. Viewed in this light, the book may actually be a warning, a powerful warning at that. And these days, perhaps a very, very timely warning. Pay heed. But listen, about 50 years ahead of the greedy pack, England, in particular Northern England, would set the stage for the coming Industrial Revolution. As lifetime Yorkshire resident, Bronte would have been right in the hurricane's eye. A better vantage point there was not. In close proximity to mechanization and relentless clamor, Emily would be distinctly familiar with this expansionist and exploitive world-changing phenomenon. Once a day, for instance, her father would blast a pistol shot warning to the nearby Luddite rebels, who even now are, I think, a rather misrepresented bunch. Check it out. With Dad's eyesight failing, Emily would eventually be given this task. Consisting of 8 family members, including toddler Emily, the Brontes moved to Haworth, West Yorkshire in 1820. The patriarch, Patrick Bronte, was a minister with pretty good digs. By 1825, 8 Brontes had become 5 Brontes. Fortunately, along with father and brother Branwell, our 3 renowned sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, would survive. And by the way, Branwell was a kind of a mediocre artist and a bit of a character. In the neighborhood of Manchester and Leeds, no surprise, Haworth was a bleak industrial town, and it seems quite charming now. With smokestacks, mills, sweatshop weaving, and the like, the textile industry loomed large. Work was oppressive, unhealthy, and dangerous. Although busy and attempting to be cheerful, Haworth was quite literally a cesspool. Horrific sanitation and contamination was the norm. Combined with, say, coal emissions and steaming refuse thrown in the streets, the olfactory sensation alone must have been brutal. Oh, give me a hot day in Haworth. Yeah? Particularly affecting children, death rates were abnormally high. The average departure age was a paltry 25. Indeed, the graveyard was overflowing with subterranean occupants. With rapidly increased urbanization, poverty, cramped living conditions, rampant pestilence, and varying degrees of filth, at this time, Greater England would have been a microbial nightmare. Tuberculosis was off the charts. There was cholera, typhoid, smallpox, scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, and God knows what else. Oblivion was continuously lurking in the shadows. Even though the Brontes were something like today's upper middle class, Emily's mother and 2 sisters had sadly fallen victim to the deluge. Strongly reflecting Luddite philosophy, correct Luddite philosophy, and certainly noticed by Emily, in the book Coal, A Human History, author Barbara Fries, I think I said that right, describes Manchester and the industrial age as mass-producing the industrial masses themselves, a class of people severed from much of what they had formerly valued, including their traditions, communities, domestic comforts, and independence, and whose waking hours were now controlled by the demanding new age of the machine age. Also called a revolution, during the industrial Victorian era, England's common land and traditional agriculture, which was called crofting, would be inhaled by extreme concentrations of wealth. Consequently, there was ne'er a shortage of displaced hands. To be clear, beginning a little before the Victorian era, industrialism appeared in the mid-1700s. Emily was born in 1818, slightly before the Victorian era, and died 1848, just past its onset, okay? Between about 1750 and 1820, nearly 4,000 enclosure acts would transform 6.8 million acres of England's public land. Only a handful of open field villages would remain. It actually began much earlier and continued until about World War I. But here was the superlative onslaught. Victorian children were thrown to the dogs and similarly compelled to drink from the toilet. Unless born into a higher class, their destiny probably involved mistreatment and exploitation. They haunted the streets, workhouses, debtors' prisons, or labored long hours. As in, with diminutive proportions, miners would make excellent miners. Malnutrition and rickets were common. School was in the cards for some, but as Charlotte Bronte would relate, and the Bronte family experience would show, exposed to abuse and rampant bacterium, the train of thought could easily be derailed. With few legal rights, women were generally considered inferior to men. In 1832, the Great Reform Act, ensured that women would be excluded from voting. Cambridge and Oxford denied enrollment to women. And then I have here, although almost humorously, ultimately, the Bronte gals would basically eat them for lunch. So there you go. Beyond increasing domestic servitude or factory toil, women had few meaningful career options. Yet things would be fine as long as our ladies just stayed at home and knew their place. Under this industrial umbrella, Haworth also stood atop a sparse, and rugged landscape. The moors, those damn moors. Here is where Emily Bronte would come to be plastered into idealized minds, perhaps solidified by Charlotte Bronte's posthumous meddling, Emily's own breezy poems, and persistent images of sanguine youth rolling in the heather. But has Emily been suffocated within this association? Does she tarry as a wild Victorian hippie chick writer of a fantastic naive yarn? While intuitive passion and love of nature were certainly embraced, Emily was fond of rescuing birds, for example. It fails to recognize an astute intellectual behind the pen. Come on. I don't believe such a powerful statement could have been constructed upon partial awareness. Although definitely sheltered and insular, still various factors bring weight to Emily Bronte's grasp of the tangible world. She knew, for instance, that however bold was the book's message, audacity could only be pushed so far. There were obvious boundaries. Issues like religion, perhaps heightened by her father's enormous presence, gender and politics had to be carefully manipulated or implied. And you should know that Wuthering Heights was first presented under the male pseudonym of Ellis Bell. So Emily Bronte was Ellis Bell to the public. Moreover, she had spent time in Belgium. Mostly, though, Bronte would be keenly aware of all things Yorkshire, industrial Yorkshire. Furthermore, it was the stupendous romantic period. Byron, Wordsworth, and Coleridge were waxing frenetic. The French Revolution lingered within earshot. Enlightenment Enlightenment ideas were propagating not just Emily, but all the Brontes would have been deeply affected within such a turbulent and often reactionary atmosphere. Many flavors of Heathcliff, for instance, were kicking around. Mary Shelley comes to mind. Captain Ahab picks his teeth with a harpoon. Uriah Heep takes a greasy swing at us. What's fascinating, though, in a class by itself, Wuthering Heights would venture further. Expressionism would be a more appropriate handle, other than perhaps Turner, Blake, Goya, and maybe a scant peppering of others. None of Bronte's contemporaries would produce such modern, progressive work. It would take at least 5 or 6 more decades for the expressionist movement to surface. Even then, considered mean and barbaric. Pardon me for a second here. I'm just reading it, and I lost it. Right, it was coming to a big crescendo here, and I lost it. The expressionist, anyway, even then considered mean and barbaric, it was a hard sell. No wonder Emily's book was scorned right out of the gate. Bronte died young, and Wuthering Heights was her only major work. Perhaps due to her sensitive nature, frailty, and unhealthy environment, the book suggests an undeniable anxious quality, meaning she may have actually sensed the clock ticking. But this impatience also imparts a certain thrilling edge and probably implies a pressing underlying message. It has been suggested that Emily may have harbored some type of mental illness, and this could be true on some level, but I think it is a precarious notion at best. It should almost be expected that industrialism has been largely omitted from Bronte's background. Consider, to this day, we have difficulty accepting industrialism's harsh persistence. From this prophetic perspective alone, her story could be a masterpiece. But it's more. Some people believe it to be one of the best books ever written. Maybe the best. Honestly, I see no reason to disagree. It picks you up. It holds you by the feet, and it shakes you to the core. It's dark and fresh at the same time, immediate yet complex, free but contained. Tension is exquisitely crafted. Ultimately, though, who is or was this Emily Bronte? It's hard to say, and what is known may have been distorted after the fact. Still, her existence is not a complete blank. I think Bronte's personality is fairly readable. We can see her playing piano, making bread, sketching, or hanging out with beloved Sister Anne. She was extremely taciturn and struggled with social situations. She had difficulty staying away from home. At length, with life's expression bombarded by apprehension and anxiety, Emily's villainous message, I think, seems rather appropriate. Whatever the case may be, oh, how wicked was little Emily.